In this video, we will explore the hidden economic reality of the world in which Jesus lived. We will examine how Roman extraction shaped daily life in Judea, how debt became a permanent condition rather than a temporary burden, how the temple functioned not only as a religious center, but as a powerful financial institution, and why ideas about debt forgiveness, justice, and release became so dangerous in a system built on inequality. This is not just a story about faith. It is a story about money, power, and why economic pressure can turn words into a threat to empires. Most people imagine the time of Jesus as a purely spiritual setting. Sandals, sermons, miracles, moral lessons unfolding in a distant religious past. But for the people actually living in that world, daily life was not shaped primarily by theology. It was shaped by money, or more precisely, by the lack of it. The world into which the historical figure of Jesus was born was defined by one of the most unequal economic systems the ancient Mediterranean had ever seen. Welcome to Financial Labyrinth, where money, power, and history collided, where nothing is ever as simple as it appears. At the beginning of the 1st century, Judea existed within the Roman Empire, the most efficient extraction system the world had ever known. Rome did not conquer territories to integrate them. It conquered them to feed the center. Provinces existed to move wealth outward. Grain, silver, labor flowing constantly from the edges of the empire toward Rome itself. Judea was one of those edges. And that mattered because Judea was not wealthy. It was largely rural, agricultural, and economically fragile. Most people lived off small plots of land, not farms in the modern sense, but pieces of soil just large enough to survive. A bad harvest did not mean lower profits. It meant hunger. And Rome did not care. Rome governed Judea through a mix of local elites and imperial officials. Kings like Herod the Great ruled with Roman approval. After his death, Roman prefects such as Pontius Pilate oversaw the region. Their responsibility was not to improve living standards. It was to maintain order and ensure revenue continued to flow. Taxes were the backbone of the system. And this is where the reality becomes uncomfortable. Today, people think of taxes as something paid on income, profit, or growth. In Judea, taxes were owed regardless of outcome. You paid because you existed. Land taxes, produce taxes, head taxes, tolls on roads and markets, religious taxes layered on top of imperial ones. As a payment, and consequences were immediate. There was no appeals process, no safety net. Tax collection was outsourced to local contractors, tax farmers, who paid Rome upfront for the right to collect, and then extracted as much as possible to recover their costs and generate profit. Abuse was not a flaw in the system, it was the incentive. If you could not pay, you borrowed. Debt was everywhere. And unlike modern debt, it came with no relief mechanisms, no bankruptcy, no restructuring. Interest accumulated quickly. Land was collateral. One bad year could push a family into a spiral they would never escape. The pattern was brutally consistent. A farmer plants crops, weather turns, harvest fails, taxes are still due. The farmer borrows from a local lender often, a wealthy landowner or a temple-connected elite. Interest accumulates. The next year, yields recover slightly, but the debt remains. Eventually, the land is seized. The farmer becomes a tenant on what was once his own property, or a laborer, or disappears altogether. This was not an accident. It was structural. Over time, land consolidated into fewer hands. Small plots vanished. Large estates expanded. Wealth clustered around elites, aligned with Roman authority and temple administration. The majority slid into precarity. The economy did not merely produce poverty, it reproduced it. There was no appeals process, no safety net. Tax collection was outsourced to local contractors, tax farmers who paid Rome up front for the right to collect and then extracted as much as possible to recover their costs and generate profit. Abuse was not a flaw in the system. It was the incentive. If you could not pay, you borrowed. Debt was everywhere. And unlike modern debt, it came with no relief mechanisms, no bankruptcy, no restructuring. Interest accumulated quickly. Land was collateral. One bad year could push a family into a spiral they would never escape. The pattern was brutally consistent. A farmer plants crops. Weather turns. Harvest fails. Taxes are still due. The farmer borrows from a local lender, often a wealthy landowner or a temple-connected elite. Interest accumulates. The next year, yields recover slightly, but the debt remains. Eventually, the land is seized. The farmer becomes a tenant on what was once his own property, or a laborer, or disappears altogether. This was not an accident. It was structural. Over time, land consolidated into fewer hands. Small plots vanished. Large estates expanded. Wealth clustered around elites aligned with Roman authority and temple administration. The majority slid into precarity. The economy did not merely produce poverty, it reproduced it. And there was no state safety net, no unemployment support, no welfare, no public housing. Family was the only buffer. Community charity existed, but it was limited. When too many people fell at once, the system offered nothing. Debt was not only financial, it was social. Losing land meant losing status, security, and identity. A family's future could be erased by drought, a tax increase, or a single unpaid obligation. This is the world Jesus was born into, and it must be stated clearly. Most people were not poor because they were lazy, immoral, or cursed. They were poor because the system required them to be. Rome needed surplus. Local elites needed rents. The temple needed revenue. All of that pressure landed on people with the least margin for error. This also produced something else: tension. Judea was volatile. Rebellions flared regularly. Banditry was not simply crime, it was economic desperation. Groups emerged, promising justice, relief, reversal. Messianic movements did not arise in comfort. They arose in collapse. This is where modern audiences often miss the point. When people listened to sermons about debt forgiveness, release, and justice, they were not hearing metaphors. They were hearing economic survival. When they heard talk of the poor, it was not abstract compassion. It was their neighbors, their families, themselves. Forgiveness did not mean emotional relief. It meant debt cancellation, escape. And escape was rare. The Roman system was designed to be efficient, not humane. It extracted wealth upward with remarkable consistency. It tolerated suffering as long as order was maintained. Stability mattered more than fairness. Revenue mattered more than lives. That is why Judea felt suffocating. People worked harder and fell further behind. Productivity did not translate into security. Growth did not lift all boats. It lifted a few and sank the rest. The economy functioned, but it did not heal. And everyone knew it. This is where ideas become dangerous. When a system is this tight, even small changes feel revolutionary. Even words can destabilize it, especially words. By the time Jesus began speaking publicly, economic pressure had reached a breaking point. The audience was ready. The fractures were visible. The anger was real. The desperation was rational. This was not background context. This was the engine. To understand why the system felt so inescapable, you have to examine the institution people believed was meant to protect them: temple. Most people today imagine the temple in Jerusalem as a purely religious space. But economically, it was one of the most powerful financial institutions in the region. It did not just shape belief, it moved money on a massive scale. The temple functioned simultaneously as a sacred site, a treasury, a tax authority, and a court. Every adult Jewish male was required to pay a yearly temple tax, enforced and mandatory. The tax had to be paid in a specific silver coin. Local currencies were rejected. Roman coins were rejected. Money changers facilitated the exchange for a fee. Pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem needed to convert currency. Vendors sold sacrificial animals at temple-approved prices. Even the poor paid. Religion did not replace Roman taxation. It was stacked on top of it, and here lies the central tension. Temple elites were deeply intertwined with Roman authority. High priests were appointed with Roman approval. Stability mattered more than righteousness. Cooperation mattered more than justice. The institution claiming moral authority over the people also benefited from the same extraction logic that impoverished them. The temple preached holiness and forgiveness, yet reinforced debt and inequality. Access to God required payment. Purity required offerings. Forgiveness required sacrifice. And sacrifice required money. Charity existed, but it treated symptoms, not causes. It could not undo land loss. It could not cancel debts. And people noticed. This is why Jesus' words resonated. When he spoke of debt forgiveness, people heard economic relief. When he spoke of release, they heard escape. When he spoke of the poor, they saw themselves. And when he spoke of the kingdom of God, they heard an alternative order, one where the existing system was not final. Words alone do not threaten power. Behavior does. When Jesus overturned the tables of the money changers, it was not merely religious outrage, it was economic confrontation. He challenged the machinery that monetized access to the sacred. He called it a den of robbers, not because money existed, but because extraction had replaced justice. This crossed a line. Rome tolerated prophets. It tolerated teachers. It tolerated critics. What it did not tolerate was instability. The conflict was not primarily theological. It was economic and political. The system could tolerate suffering. It could tolerate inequality. What it could not tolerate was a narrative that made people question why suffering existed and whether it was necessary. Once people stop accepting debt as destiny, extraction becomes harder to enforce. Judea was a pressure cooker. Taxes, debt, land loss, religious obligation, and repression converged. Revolt was inevitable, and Rome responded, as it always did, with force. What followed was not the collapse of the system, but its escalation. Rebellion in 66 CE, siege in 70 CE, the temple destroyed stone by stone. Its treasury looted, its hierarchy erased. Rome did not simply suppress dissent. It dismantled the infrastructure that made resistance possible. Yet this is what people often miss. The destruction of the temple did not end extraction. It streamlined it. Roman taxation intensified. Land consolidation accelerated. Debt did not disappear. It became more bureaucratic. It's more absolute. Rome won control of territory, but not control of meaning. Jesus had not led an army. He had not proposed a new tax code. He had not attempted regime change. What he challenged was the moral logic that made extraction feel inevitable and justified. By separating debt from moral failure, by offering forgiveness without institutional payment, by placing the poor at the center rather than the margins, he undermined legitimacy itself. Empires can survive suffering. They struggle when people stop believing suffering is the price of order. After the temple fell, the system Jesus critiqued persisted, but so did his critique. Small communities formed around different assumptions, shared resources, mutual aid, internal debt relief, loyalty based on belief rather than land or status. These were not revolutions. They were parallel moral economies. Rome crushed armed rebellion quickly. It always did. But this kind of challenge was harder to eliminate because it did not rely on territory, temples, or treasuries. It moved with people. It survived loss. And over time, something remarkable happened. Rome did not eliminate this alternative framework. It absorbed it. By the 4th century, authority could no longer rest on force alone. Moral credibility mattered into power. The economy of Jesus' time reveals something deeply uncomfortable. Systems do not collapse simply because they are unjust. They collapse when the stories that justify them stop working. Rome optimized extraction, but it never repaired the moral breach that made its dominance feel natural. History does not repeat, but it exposes patterns. And once you see how power defends itself not only with force, but with stories, it becomes much harder to believe those stories are accidental. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History has answers. I'll show you where to look.